This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to showcase an Oathbreaker deck tech with Huatli the Sun's Heart as the Oathbreaker and Tower Defense as the signature spell. Thank you for joining us as we feature this Oathbreaker deck tech. Huatli the Sun's Heart is a planeswalker that comes into play with 7 loyalty counters. Her mana cost is 2 and either a green mana or a white mana. Huatli has a static ability that has each creature we control assign combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. We can -3 Huatli to gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures we control. Here, it's all about the toughness. Everything built around the 58, everything with our signature spell is going to tie to the big toughnesses of our creatures. And that signature spell is, of course, Tower Defense. It is an instant for 1 and a green mana. Creatures we control get +0/+5 and gain reach until end of turn. The reach is nice, but let's be honest, that +0/+5 is meant to buff the toughnesses of our creatures as we send them into combat, and we could definitely look at our signature spell as something that we could cast twice in the same turn for the purposes of delivering one massive blow in combat. Alright, we're going to continue with the land base here. It's a pretty no-frills land base. We're playing only 2 colors, so it's going to be pretty symmetrical in how we constructed it. We begin with our basic lands. We have 4 plains and 4 forests for a total of 8 basic lands to start off this portion of the deck tech. Following our nearly every other card here are going to be our dual-colored lands. They're going to tap to give us either a white or a green, or give us the option for one of the two. We begin with Command Tower, the best land in the format. After that, we have Temple Garden, which is our shock land. We can pay 2 life for it to come into play untapped. Here we have Bountiful Promenade. It comes into play untapped if we have 2 or more opponents. Canopy Vista comes into play untapped if we control 2 or more basic lands. Sun Petal Grove comes into play untapped. That's our Selesnyan check land, of course, as long as we control a forest or a plains. Fortified Village comes into play untapped if we reveal a forest or plains card from our hand. Wooded Bastion as our Selesnyan filter land. It taps for a colorless, or we can pay a green and a white mana, tap it for 2 green, 2 white, or 1 of each. Sungrass Prairie is another kind of filter land. We pay 1 generic mana into it, tap it, turn it sideways, and add a green and white mana to our mana pool. Horizon Canopy can come into when it comes into play. No, it doesn't have a come into play effect. Horizon Canopy, when it's in play, we can tap and pay 1 life and add a green or a white mana to our mana pool, or we can pay 1 generic mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw a card. Here we have the Branch Loft Pathway. It can come into play as either the green side, or we can choose to have it come into play on the other side, which is going to give us white, which is going to be, of course, the Boulder Loft Pathway. This will help us with immediate mana fixing. It does nothing to help us in the long game for the purposes of tapping for a green or a white mana, but it does give us the option as it comes into play for whatever color we need the most. And the last land here is the only land that does not generate any colored mana. It is Command Beacon. We can tap and sacrifice this to put our Oathbreaker from the command zone into our hand. As Huatli is so integral to how we're going to win our games in Oathbreaker, she's most likely going to be a lightning rod for attention, as most of the Oathbreakers in the format are. So to have a Command Beacon at our disposal to get her into our hand so that we can cast her on the cheap could be the difference between winning or losing. Alright, we have a little bit of mana ramp in this deck as it pertains to spells, and some more to come later as it pertains to our creatures. You'll notice a trend that the majority of the creatures in this deck are very, very very well costed economically. So those 2 spells is going to be Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. Here are the identical spells, nearly identical spells, I should say. 2 and a green mana. We search our library for 2 basic lands. We reveal them. We put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and then we put the other into our hands. So that's it for those spells. Now let's move forward with some removal spells in this deck. We're going to begin with a pair of 1 white mana instant removal spells in Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Swords to Plowshares is going to exile target creature, and so is Path to Exile. Swords allows its controller to gain life equal to its power, while Path to Exile lets its controller search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Next up, we have Banishing Light, which is an enchantment. When it comes into play, we exile target non-land permanents an opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. This card, more often than not, is going to target an Oathbreaker. Next up, we have a pair of spells that are very similar in Beast Within and Generous Gift. They're both instants with mana values of 3, 2 and a green for the Beast, and 2 and a 1 for the Gift. The Beast and the Gift both destroy target permanent. The Beast leaves behind a 3/3 green Beast token, while the Gift leaves behind a 3/3 green Elephant token. Next, we have Return to Dust. 2 and 2 white mana at instant speed. We exile target artifact or enchantment. If we cast a spell during our main phase, we may exile another target artifact or enchantment. Slaughter the Strong is a mass removal spell that fits the theme of this build beautifully. 1 and 2 white mana. Each player chooses any number of creatures they control with total power 4 or less, then sacrifices all other creatures they control. As you'll see shortly, casting that spell will tilt the battlefield in our favor dramatically. And our last mass removal spell is something similar to Slaughter the Strong. It is Fell the Mighty. 4 and a white, we destroy all creatures with power greater than target creature's power. If our target creature has a power of 0, well, guess what? Every creature with a power higher than that is going bye-bye. Alright, so now we're going to have a few spells here that we've included as a way in which to help protect our creatures. We have Flawless Maneuver. It's an instant for 2 and a white. If we control our Oathbreaker, we may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. Creatures we control gain indestructible until end of turn. That will help to make sure that our army stays in play so that we can use their robust toughnesses in combat to win the game. Similar to Flawless Maneuver, we have Unbreakable Formation. It's another instant with 2 and a white as the mana cost, and creatures we control gain indestructible until end of turn. If we cast this spell during our main phase, we put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain Vigilance until end of turn. That could be considered a game-ending spell in this build. Next up, we have Collected Company. 3 and a green mana at instant speed. We look at the top 6 cards of our library, and we put up to 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then we put the rest in the bottom of our library in any order. Again, as you'll see, we're going to populate our side of the battlefield awfully quickly with these creatures, and Huatli's going to come down and win us the game. Next card is another way in which to make sure that our creatures, when they fall in combat, get back into our library so that we can keep casting them over and over again with Wheel of Sun and Moon. Here we have an enchantment aura that enchants a player. Its CMC is 2 Selesnyan hybrid mana. If a card would be put into an enchanted player's graveyard from anywhere, instead that card is revealed and put on the bottom of that player's library instead. Of course, we could put that onto an opponent, particularly if that opponent is trying to abuse their library. Alright, now before we roll out all of our creatures, we have a few win conditions tied to our creatures and our big toughness theme. The first is Primal Rage. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green mana. All creatures we control gain trample. And as you see, when we start rolling out these biggins, giving them trample is almost unfair. Next up, and a great card to include if Huatli is indisposed and languishing in the command zone, is Assault Formation. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green mana. Each creature we control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. That's exactly what Huatli's static ability provides. We can also pay a green mana to have target creature with Defender can attack this turn as though it didn't have Defender. And then lastly, and oft overlooked on this enchantment, 2 and a green mana, creatures we control get +0/+1 until end of turn. Remember, that +1 buffs the toughness, and that's how we deal our combat damage. Akroma's Will, cast at instant speed for 3 and 1 white mana. We choose one of the following 2, and if we control Huatli as we cast it, then we get the best of both worlds. Creatures we control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn, or creatures we control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. With Huatli on our side of the battlefield and a nice, robust army, Akroma's Will win us the game. And if that doesn't win us the game through toughness-enhanced combat, then perhaps we can win the game through Infect with Triumph of the Hordes. 2 and 2 green, sorcery speed. Until end of turn, creatures we control get +1/+1, gain Trample, and Infect. And just as a reminder, creatures with Infect deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and deal damage to players in the form of poison counters. And when a player gets 10 poison counters or more, they lose the game. All right, with all of our spells out of the way, here come the stack of our, well, I guess we could call them biggins because their toughness definitely is. There's not going to be too many thrills to these creatures. They're just really in here because of what their second number on the bottom right-hand corner of their card signifies. Here we have Ornithopter. It's an 0/2 with flying, costs us nothing to cast. That's fantastic. Look at that evasion, turn 1. Same thing with Birds of Paradise, a 0/1 for a green. It flies, and plus it taps to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Gilded Goose is 0/2 flying again. That's just 1 green mana. When it comes into play, we create a food token, and we can tap and sacrifice a food to add 1 mana of any color, and we can also pay 1 and a green to create. We can pay 1 and a green and tap the Gilded Goose to create a food token. Next up, we have our Boreal Grazer. It's an 0/3 for 1 green mana. It has reach, and when it comes into play, we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. A turn 1 Arboreal Grazer could really put us ahead of our opponents in this game. Another 1 mana creature we have, Oathbreaker Cultivator, an 0/3 for just 1 green mana. We can pay 2 and a green, tap and sacrifice this human druid to search our library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Still at just 1 mana, the next 4 creatures are pretty much identical. We have a Tasseled Dromedary for 0/4. Again, just 1 white mana. We have a Yoked Ox for 0/4. We have a God Pharaoh's Faithful, which isn't going to help us too much because outside of it being 0/4, whenever we cast a blue, black, or red spell, we gain a life. And those are not the colors of this build. And 1 more 0/4 for white mana. We have Lagana Band Trailblazer. Whenever we cast a spell that targets this creature, we put a +1/+1 counter on it. I don't think we're going to get too many benefits or gain much value on that ability, but still, it's a 0/4 for 1 white mana. All right, now we're jumping up to a CMC of 2. Look at this, 1 and 0. Look at what we've got right here. This is going to be a very fast deck, folks. 1 and a green mana, we have an 0/3. It's Leafkin Druid. We can tap to add a green, and if we control 4 more creatures, we add 2 green mana instead. Next up, we have Primal Druid, an 0/3 for 1 and a green mana. When it dies, we may search our library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We have an 0/5 here with Nyx's Fleece Ram, and it costs just 1 and 1 white mana, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we gain a life. Here we have Giant Ox. It's a 0/6 for 1 and 1 white mana. It does have a vehicle synergistic ability, but we don't have any vehicles in this deck. Giant Ox is here because it's a 0/6 for 1 and 1 white mana. Next up, we have Skin Shifter. It's a 1/1 for 1 and a green, but we can pay a green mana to choose one of the following until end of turn. Shapeshifter becomes a 4/4 Rhino with Trample, or it becomes a 2/2 Bird with Flying, or it becomes a 0/8 Plant. So with the initial investment of 1 and 1 green mana, we can pay an additional green mana during one of our turns, or during one of our opponent's turns, of course, to turn this into a 0/8. In this build with Huatli, Skin Shifter could be one of the most valuable 2-drops in all of this deck tech. All right, ticking up from 2 to 3, we have Runic Armasaur. It's a 2/5 dinosaur for 1 and 2 green, and whenever an opponent activates an ability of a creature or land that isn't a mana ability, we put a card into our hand, and I'm pretty sure our opponents are going to be doing plenty of that during their turns. 1 in Selesnya colors, we have Ironroot Warlord. It's a star 5. Its power is equal to the number of creatures we control, and it has a built-in creature token producing ability. We pay 3 in Selesnya colors to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. That's a little inflated from a cost perspective, but in the mid to late game, that's a good mana sink to have on a creature that gets a bigger power each time a creature is on our side of the battlefield. Moving up to a CMC of 4, we have Sidar Kondo of Jamora. It's a 2/5 with flanking, which means whenever a creature without flanking blocks this creature, the blocking creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Creatures our opponents control without flying or reach can't block creatures with power 2 or less. If you look at all of the creatures listed here, right now, all of their powers are 2 or less. With Sidar Kondo on our side of the battlefield, we look to him, this human knight, as a win condition. Next, we have Trostani, Selesnia's Voice. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Because the toughnesses of our creatures are so big, this inflated amount of life could really help us in the long game, because it'll take that much more time for our opponents to tick our life total down southward. With a CMC of 5, we have Oran Frostfang, a 2/6 that gives attacking creatures we control Death Touch, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. 2 creatures left, and the next one is going to help synergize our theme if Huatli is indisposed. We have the Belligerent Brontodon, a 4/6 dinosaur for 5 in Selesnya colors. Each creature we control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. And lastly, card number 58 of this deck tech is Zitalpa Primal Dawn, a 4/8 legendary elder dinosaur for 6 and 2 white mana. It has flying, it has double strike, it has vigilance, trample, and indestructible, and it attacks with a toughness of 8. And there you have it, MTG BC, a Huatli the Sun's Heart Oathbreaker deck tech with Tower Defense as the signature spell. You can click the link in the description to take you to the deck list of this build. Let me know your thoughts about this deck tech in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.